The best way to predict the future is to create it. Welcome to the Humanscape podcast, where we help business leaders prepare for the future of work now. Are you ready to bring work to life and life to work? We are. Let's go.
All right, we are back and better than ever with another episode of the Humanscape podcast from HumanWorks 8. I'm Jason Cochran, the adaptive futurist at HumanWorks 8, and I'm going to be your host today. As a reminder, the Humanscape podcast exists to help business leaders like you prepare for the future of work now. In just a few minutes, you will hear from today's guest, Steve Sorenson, who's the Senior Director of Learning and Culture at Johnsonville. Among the many things that you're going to hear us discuss and learn from Steve today are, what do learning and culture look like in an organization like Johnsonville that has 2,000 team members? And how does Steve go about leading these learning and coaching initiatives in an organization that size? So I guess, in a way, you could say if learning and culture were sausage, we are going to learn how sausage is made today from Steve's experiences at Johnsonville. But before we bring him on, here's a little bit about Steve. His current role is the Senior Director of Learning and Culture at Johnsonville Sausage, and it involves him coaching their organizational learning and development department, as well as their manufacturing member services, their HR function. And he believes it's his responsibility as a coach to make great things happen for others. And to that end, his goal is to create a high-performance culture by identifying and growing the talent within Johnsonville. So without further ado, Steve, welcome to the Humanscape podcast. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me in, Jason. I'm really excited to talk about my history and what we're doing at Johnsonville.
I am too. I've really been looking forward to this one. And I've got to be honest, the first time we met a couple months back, Steve, some of the things you're sharing with me in terms of your mindset of how you approach learning and development, particularly in the workspace, just really caught my attention. And I can't wait to get into that. But before we get to that, let's hear a little bit about just your journey of how did you get interested in people, culture, developing talent, those types of things in business?
It seemed like I always had a kind of a knack for connecting with people, and I don't necessarily know how to explain it, but it was just kind of who I am at my core. But I remember the first time it kind of sunk to me, or really sunk in, that I should really be in some sort of a learning or development or training function. I had applied for a position. This was back when I was with the Schwan Food Company. I was a route driver, driving the yellow trucks around the neighborhood, and it was my first training position. So it was a very unique interview situation. They flew me from Fargo, North Dakota to Davenport, Iowa, gave me the facilitator guide, and said, "We want you to teach an hour this afternoon. You pick out whatever you want to teach. We just want to see how much natural talent you have." And I thought, ooh, this could be interesting. I've never taught in front of a class before. This is going to be very, very interesting. But so I prepped for that, and I must have impressed them, because I was actually applying for a role in California that they were hiring, and they were going to hire the Davenport, Iowa position the next year. But after my interview, they said, I think your mindset and your Midwest approach is going to play better in Iowa than it will be in California. And I was more than ecstatic about that, because I wasn't super excited about moving all those miles away from our families out to California. So they actually swapped the positions, because after my interview and after watching me instruct, and they said, we want to hire the Iowa position this year, and then we're going to slide out the California position. So from that moment, I was kind of hooked that, boy, making an impact on people's life and seeing how you can light somebody up and have an impact on them through the modeling, the behavior that you're doing. So kind of from that moment, I was hooked.
I love it. Well, and they were hooked too. Anytime, and you know this too, probably in your position, I've experienced it. When you find the right person, you move the mountains. You shift things around to make it work, to get them in the fold. And it sounded like they knew what they had in you at the time. So that's really fascinating. But obviously, right now, with a lot of things that are changing in the world of work, there have been so many things that have come out from Gallup, from McKinsey. Seems like a lot of reports are just saying how many folks are really struggling with feeling connected in the workplace. Just from your kind of high level perspective, when you think about those kind of things, first question, why do you think maybe that is? Why do people maybe seem to be struggling a little bit more right now with that? And then number two, what do you think learning and culture, how do those pieces go about helping solve that problem? And maybe there's some things you can speak into there in terms of what you're doing at Johnsonville that's helping with those things.
When I think about the connectivity, I can even look at my own kids. COVID had a pretty big impact where it kind of pushed people kind of away from work. So there was much more remote. So people became a little more isolated. You can still connect in through Teams and virtually and things like this. But we all know that if you're on a virtual call and there's two or three people in the room, there's always that meeting after the meeting. So there was some times of that isolation in there. And I think we've become a more electronic society where I see my kids, they're texting their friends back and forth, or it's through Instagram. So those types of things, I think, can cause a little bit of isolation at times if you're not proactively looking for these types of things to say, how do I engage that team, right? I have some virtual folks on my team, and I purposefully have to work differently with those members to make sure that they're engaged and involved in the system. So I think that's what's kind of driving some of this. Of it's so much easier nowadays with social media just to put a post out there. I see where the kids, my kids specifically, they don't interact with their friends nearly as much. You go drive by any park in the United States, and there's not the families and kids out playing anymore. We've become a little bit more kind of as an introverted society, and that drives more introversion, I think. So when I think about that piece of it, I think that's what's driving some of those, at least in my personal opinion. So when I think about what we can do from a learning and culture is, how do we create that inclusive culture? And, I envision a work environment that we call our managers coaches. So that's kind of how I term things. So I kind of envision an environment where every coach is striving to be the coach they wish they had. So that means you've got to be an inspiration to folks. You've got to set an example for others by leaving the key concepts of your culture. For us, that's the Johnsonville way of superlative performance, learning for life, love your neighbor, those types of things. I think it was as senior leaders, and that's really my role, is how do I set up our senior leaders to make sure that they're living our culture, at least the tenets of it. And as we start to do that, then that can permeate through the organization. That also means you also have to have the learning and development options. So as people come into the organization, they can understand what makes Johnsonville Johnsonville, what makes Johnsonville unique. Why should I have a care about this organization? Johnsonville's tenet has always been that we want to try to have a unique and very strong culture. We've described ourselves and others as family-oriented, values-driven, a very member or employee-centric environment. Those are just the key tenets of who we are and who we strive to be.
I love that. So when you're talking about how you're talking about your kids, now it just feels like there's less connectivity, so much more is just, virtual and being on social media platforms or whatnot in terms of communication. I heard a cool story this week. So I live in Indianapolis, and I listen to a lot of sports talk radio here in Indianapolis. And on one of the shows I was listening to, they were talking about how driving into the radio station one morning, this host of the show drove by a high school, and it was before schools open. I mean, this is super early. This is, probably like 5:30 or 6 in the morning. And he said, as he drove by this high school one morning last week here in Indianapolis, there were kids in the parking lot that they got there early before school, before practices or anything. And they're hanging out in the parking lot. They're not doing anything wrong, but they're sitting on their cars and chatting and hanging out. And this person who's hosting the show is probably Gen X or maybe an older millennial, where that was the type of stuff that you did back in the day, right? I'm sure you probably experienced that. You go to school, if you're driving, you hung out maybe in the parking lot, chatted with your friends and stuff before, the first bell went off. And so, I do have some hope, that maybe we see more of that kind of stuff, that moving forward, yes, we have technology, we have the virtual things that we can do, but hopefully the experience we all went through with COVID, maybe we are hitting that point where we're starting to seek out more of the, let's do this type of stuff in person as much as we can to kind of fulfill those needs. My follow-up question for you, you said a lot of interesting things there around coaching. So my question for you, Steve, is, Johnsonville has roughly like around 2,000 team members. Is that about right?
If you go globally, it's more like 3,500.
30. Okay, so let's go with 3,500. I mean, that's globally, like you said, that's around the world. You don't have to give all the trade secrets, but I'm curious, an organization that size and around the world, how do you go about developing that coaching culture with your leaders and then maybe with your department heads? What does that look like?
Sure. So we start out with things in our orientation around Johnsonville Way. It goes down to like posters on the wall. What is coaching? What coaching isn't? We have in the back of we have a great book. It's called Path We Follow. It describes our culture. As new members start, they get this book. And it's a kind of a pamphlet, explains the history of Johnsonville, why our culture is unique, why we're proud of it. And then as it's got our core values, it talks about what are some do's and don'ts for each one of those core values. Then we have a very strong culture around having just crucial conversations with folks. So we empower folks to coach not only up the organization, but also across the organization. And of course, down through the organization as well. But it's really about creating a member well-being and open communication. So we really emphasize not just the desire, but the expectation around open and honest communications at all levels of the organization. So I just hired a new member here in the last few months. And one of the things that we were talking about is I introduced him as we were walking around to Don Fussner, our CEO. He said, if I ever need to talk to Don, he said, I'll make sure I bring you into the loop and you'll know what we're talking about. And I just looked at him. I said, that's not how we work here at Johnsonville. If you have a question that you feel that Don is the best person to ask, then just go talk to Don. You don't need to come and get my approval or ask me if it's okay. The only thing I ask is if you're going to talk to Don about something and he's going to come and ask me about it, just give me a heads up what you talked about so I can at least back you up and I'm not blindsided. But that's the kind of culture we have. So I think you can have the right training that's going on. And that is important. You have to make sure that people have a baseline of expectations and education and training around it. But I think we as leaders model the behavior we want to see in others. So if I tell my member, hey, you can go talk to the CEO if you've got a question, or you can go talk to the VP of human resources if you want to. But then when they do, if I go to them and say, hey, why'd you go talk to them? Why didn't you give me a heads up? Now I'm not living that culture, and it sends a very muddled message. So I've got to make sure I'm modeling that behavior. And that's what we try to drive through all of our coaches is it's more important that you're modeling the behaviors that you want to see as an organization that we're all striving to go after and get to.
And just out of curiosity, how long do you think it typically takes on average whenever you hire someone new to kind of get them to where they're feeling comfortable in a coaching culture where it's like, okay, this is the Johnsonville way. I'm used to this. Is this something that they pick up pretty quickly, or does it take a little bit of time for them to get comfortable in that type of context?
Yeah, I'd love to say we've got the magic pill that people come in and they take it and then they're instantly transformed into this new culture. But the problem is you've got people that come from other organizations that's not the culture. The culture is not about coaching. It's about direct and command and control. So if our interview process is working, because we screen and try to assess people for our culture, right? Not necessarily are they going to be a great fit right away, but almost are they going to be a not a fit? So we're looking for folks to say, is this person going to be able to acclimate to the way that we want our coaches to behave? So if we do a really good job of that, typically they can assimilate pretty quickly. The other thing that we're working on right now is how do we get a common understanding and alignment around everything that we do from a cultural standpoint? Because if you ask 3,500 members, what does the Johnsonville way mean to you? Currently, you might get several different answers. So we're working to consolidate that down and simplify it so that all the members see it the same exact way. And that will make things a lot easier. So we've got a lot of new members in the organization that because of COVID, we didn't have a lot of the education processes working. So we're working through that process right now. But kind of back to your question, as a new coach, some can assimilate really quickly. For others, it might take a 6 months, a year, even a couple of years. But a lot of that's dependent on the coach that they have as well. If that coach is reinforcing the behaviors, if they're living it and they're holding them accountable to those through crucial conversations, that assimilation happens much quicker.
That's great. So a lot of really interesting things there. One of those that caught my attention was you're talking about you already have this embedded in so many of your processes. So you're so far ahead of most other companies. But then you just shared how it's like we can still get better. We have to simplify this because if we were to go out and ask a lot of our, take different cross sections of our team members, you may get lots of different answers as to what the Johnsonville way is. And so just, out of curiosity on my own end, when you talk about simplifying and really trying to boil that down to where you get more consistency of this is the Johnsonville way, kind of where are you in that process, and what are some of the things you're doing that are help bringing that simplification so that you can get everyone kind of understanding and having a more consistent view of what the Johnsonville way is?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. So the last year, let me take a quick step back. So at Johnsonville, we believe we use the business to build the members, not the other way around. So we try to engage our members in a lot of the decisions that we do and a lot of the processes we do. So about a year ago, me and my team and a small group of folks started embedding on this process of how do we simplify what it means to have the Johnsonville way. Doesn't mean we're changing the Johnsonville way at all. We are not changing that, what it means to have our culture. But we've got a lot of values, we've got a lot of principles, we've got a lot of other leadership traits, and all of those were designed over time to make it easier to understand what the Johnsonville way means. So what we did is we started going down and asking ourselves a really tough question. What does it really mean to be unique at Johnsonville? What makes our culture unique and different from anybody else's? And that's what really defines our culture. So we start with the Johnsonville way and go, okay, what are the key tenets of the Johnsonville way? What are the core values that we need to pull out of there? So then what we did is we actually went out to what we called ambassadors. So we had senior leaders in the organization identify folks in their reporting structure who is living and leading the Johnsonville way to the best of our ability, in your opinion. And we identified the top about 35 members from our manufacturing plants to sales to marketing to all of the different functional areas. And then we went out and interviewed them. And we just asked them some simple questions. What does it mean to you, the Johnsonville way? How do you see people living it? How do you support your customer internally? And ask questions along that way. And what was amazing, Jason, was all these ambassadors started telling us, here's what it means, here's what it means. And we're validating what we had identified as those core values that we thought were the right things. But then we were validating it with those members. And the folks that were living it and leading it the best in the organization that we'd identified were coming back and saying the words that we had already kind of identified. So it was a good validation of, is this the right pathway? So now we've went in front of our owners, went in front of our board, and we said, hey, here's what we think the core values need to look like. And they're 100% aligned. And now next month, we're actually meeting with our extended strategy team, which is the top 85 leaders in the organization. And we're going to ask them the question, okay, what are the observable behaviors that we need to attribute to these core values? Because that's what we need to embed in through our hire to retire processes, right? So if there's observable behaviors from, say, delivering superlative performance, for example, okay, well, we need to try to interview for that. We need to screen candidates against that. We need to make sure that our expectations are about that. We need to make sure it fits into our annual review process, our compensation, our succession planning, on and on and on and on. And then once you build it into those processes, now they're the things that, if they're the things that I should see in our members every day, it makes it that our culture is getting embedded throughout everything and everybody's on the same page.
Steve, I hope our listeners are taking copious notes because you just laid out the playbook for how you go about getting consistency and simplicity and understanding of the way inside the organization. That's incredible, from the ambassadors to how you're rolling it out and then rolling it up through leadership for communication. All of that is so, so important. And as you know, when you came on Humanscape, we love to talk about people and culture because those things are absolutely critical. But sometimes we like to take kind of a futuristic look at it, right? So there's, what are the things we do now? What are the things you're anticipating in the future? And it doesn't have to be distant future, but maybe even in the next 2 or 3 years. What are some of the things right now you and other leaders at Johnsonville are preparing for that you think are coming that's really important in terms of people and culture?
Yeah. So I talked already about that we're trying to identify those observable behaviors. I think that's the key that heads us down the right pathway, because we can put some real-time data and analytics into the hands of our deskless workers. So that's something we've been working to do now. Is you've got members that are working in our manufacturing plants that are running machinery, and they don't necessarily know how it goes or what's causing what if there's a downtime. So we are putting that real-time data and analytics in their hands, right? So there's tablets that they have out in the production floor. So that's another thing that we're doing. We can identify the behaviors, and then let's get some real-time data. So you start to tie that together. If I know what I'm supposed to do, and then we mirror that with how am I supposed to do the work. So that gets to be a pretty solid connection. The other thing we're doing is we're actually in the process right now, and this will happen over probably the next year, going back and building what we call career maps and learning journeys. So that way members have a plan on what it takes to either move into a new position or a function that they're interested in. I think those things right there are pretty critical that we're trying to drive after in the organization. So we are trying to make sure we see, let the need drive the change rather than let's just try to change a bunch of stuff and then we'll figure out how to work. So we're out talking to members. What's the problems you're facing and how can we help you address those pieces?
So I can't remember if I shared this before when we first met, Steve, but I first started as a psychologist working in schools. It wasn't working with businesses. It was working in schools, public schools. And one of the things that was really fascinating to me that I started to learn over time is I kind of took a step back as an educational psychologist and would look at how things were addressed in schools between the adults and the students when it came to student behavior. Was many times the adults would come up with a lot of ideas that they thought were brilliant, and then they'd go and implement them. But the person who wasn't at the table providing input on the solution was the student or students whom they were for. And more times than not, what would happen is you go implement it, it doesn't work. So eventually you got to a point where you started getting these models in schools of collaborative problem solving. And it was this aha moment where it's like, you know what, we're not involving the students enough. They should have a seat at the table talking about what does it mean for us to reduce the number of incidents that we're having in the cafeteria or the playground or in the bathrooms kind of thing, instead of just all the adults getting around, kind of hypothesizing as to what they think the problem and the solution is. You got to involve the students. And I can't help but think of that type of analogy with what you're describing there also, is that you got to include folks in these solutions and have those conversations, like you're saying, about innovation, because you can design things that you think are great for future needs, but if it's not aligned to the actual needs that people are saying that they need to do their job or their role, then there's misalignment there. So I love that you called that piece out. Out of curiosity, when it comes to innovation at Johnsonville, we've talked a little bit about coaching culture. What does innovation look like at Johnsonville in a company that large? How is there time maybe built in for people to think innovatively or better ways to do things?
Yeah, we've got a couple of different ways that we look at it. We look at it from the sausage side of the world, right? We've got groups of folks that are working on what's the next innovation of what consumers want. So they're looking at consumer data, kind of going back to what you're talking about with the students. Let's not just innovate necessarily down places that we think it's good, but what are our consumers saying? What are our customers thinking? But then when you get into our day-to-day work, right, whether it's in a manufacturing facility or an office facility, it's about giving some autonomy to members and the freedom to explore new ideas and take ownership of their projects. So we've got teams that are working on ideation projects inside the facility. We've got different places inside that they're talking about how can we better recognize our members? How can we enhance, we call them best place to work teams. So they're working on things like, how do our members want to be celebrated? How do our members want to be recognized? What is meaningful to them? And then we have daily huddles. We call them tailgates because we're a sausage company, right? So we get together with members, and that's a chance for members to talk about what's working on their line, what's not working on their line, what ideas do they have. And it's a way for us to have a two-way dialogue communication. The other thing we do is we have, whether it's a plant meeting or a town hall where senior leaders are talking to members, and we do roundtables with members at various facilities. And we're just asking members, hey, what's working, what's not working. But one of the things that we found is probably the most critical, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about with the students, is anytime you're providing that autonomy, at least the way I look at it, is that usually starts with some guidelines around kind of the decision authority those members or teams have. Because you can't have, like in the case of back to the school, I'm sure there's some high level strategy decisions that the school was making. Like, for example, should we add on to the cafeteria or should we add on to the gymnasium? Some of these big ideas that you have a senior leadership team at the organization that's deciding those big things. But then what you can hand off is, how do we make that happen? So we've made this decision as an organization that we're going to invest here or we're going to go after this process. Then we engage the members with, how does that look? One, does this make sense that this is the process that we're going down? But more importantly, how do we get this implemented? What's the best way to look at this? And that's where a lot of the innovation and the autonomy come in with the members.
I love that. And especially the tailgate parties. That is such a cool concept. I love that name and living into your brand there in terms of how you conduct some of the meetings. And so, it's often been said, Steve, you probably heard this before, that what gets measured gets managed. So you've shared a lot of things with us today, kind of taking us behind the curtain in terms of what does it actually take for the Johnsonville way to be lived out and the things that you're doing to do it. What are some of the things that you're measuring that kind of give you a finger on the pulse of, yeah, we're getting there, or we need to make some adjustments here? What are the things that you measure and look for?
Sure. In all of these, we're looking at both leading and lagging indicators, right? So you think about the lagging indicators are things like we have an annual survey that we do. We call it our Voice of the Member survey. And members they answer a few simple questions, but we're trying to get after what's our member satisfaction look like? How happy are you to work at Johnsonville? Are you likely to recommend Johnsonville to a family or a friend member? So those are some of those lagging indicators. The great thing about that is members can put comments in, and the senior leadership team and I read through every single comment. And there's some things that we can take immediate action against. And there's some things that somebody's just venting. But it's nice to be able to catch those things and find out and get back to the facility. They're all anonymous, but we can go back to the facility and say, hey, there seems to be a overwhelming feeling of this happening in your facility or in this department or from this coach. So it helps us to identify some more targeted coaching as well as are there programs or things that we need to do differently as an organization. But more on the leading side, every member that starts into our operation plan, we have a 10-day survey that we do. So they're on their 10th day of membership at Johnsonville. We just ask them, how was your onboarding? What did you like about it? What was missing? What could we do to improve it? Those types of things. And then we also do 30, 60, and 90-day evaluations. So at 30-day mark, at the 60-day mark, and the 90-day mark, that member and their coach are sitting down and having a conversation about their performance level, as well as how are they interacting into our culture? Are they behaving in a way? Are they talking up at the tailgates? Are they providing feedback to peers? Those types of things. And then we also looked at in the past, what percentage of our internal promotions are moving into coaching roles. So as we think about coaches, we want to try to promote from within. So we've targeted a mid 70% range that of new coaches getting promoted, we want them to come from within the organization. So those are some of the more unique things. Now, we have all the traditional metrics around things like EBITDA and safety and sales and all those types of things. But these are some more things around kind of the cultural side that we look at and measure.
That's fascinating. And it sounds like those have been, carefully thought about because of the need. Again, you're trying to tie it to the needs that you see in terms of where you need to grow. Out of curiosity, Steve, any artificial intelligence starting to be used in terms of capturing or understanding those data, or even other aspects of the business? Has Johnsonville started to look at how AI can help complement the work that's already being done by your incredible talent?
Yeah, we're starting to dabble in that. We're taking kind of a wait and see, only because we have so much proprietary data with how the sausage is made, how our recipes, all of those type of things that we're cautiously dipping our toe into the water from an AI. I think from an OD&L standpoint, we're trying to move probably a little bit further because some of those things you can do in a little bit more generic. But there are things in AI that we are using when it comes into whether it's proofreading different things, when it's starting to scan documents, those types of things. We've used even some robotic automation for, processes that are very duplicative and repetitive. So there are some AI things that we're starting to go after, but from a grand scale, we're taking a little bit more cautious approach to it and making sure it's the right solution for the right problem.
Perfect. And Steve, I got two more questions before we start to get into our three parts of the mind segment where we're going to get to know you a little bit better on a personal level. The first one here is a little bit more of a personal question. That's what's one of your proudest moments so far with Johnsonville? Anything that kind of comes to mind when you think of your proud moments or accomplishments or things that you've helped deliver and be a part of at Johnsonville? What comes to mind?
One of the things when I first came here, I was brought in as a continuous improvement coach. So it was around our CI. And what was really exciting about that, it was we'd been doing a lot of continuous improvement for a long time, but we didn't have necessarily a global strategy on how to bring this all together. So that was a pretty proud moment of myself. I spent 3.5 years working with a team of getting a global structure on there. And every year we were improving how much money we were saving the organization through reduction of non-value added work or redundancies in our process or just improving processes. And the way we did it was a very kind of a lean approach where we went and engaged with the members through Kaizen events, and we were engaging members to solve their own problems and just giving them some tools and resources for them to go after and say, this machine jams all the time, drives me crazy, makes my life a nightmare. So we would come in and we'd help solve that problem. And by doing those types of things, we were able to save the organization a lot of money. But even more importantly, we were able to reduce the headaches from our members tremendously. And just by doing that, then that led me into moving back into direct operations. And it was just a great launching pad for me in the organization, and something I'm really proud of. That's where I started out.
Love it. And sounds like it's persisting today too, all the benefits that brought about at Johnsonville. So the last question before we get into the three parts of the mind is one it's kind of an open-ended question. And that is, I'm sure there's a lot of things you wanted to share with me and with our audience today. So was there something that I should have asked you, but I didn't in our conversation so far?
One thing I always think about, this is one of my favorite interview questions I ask of folks when they come into Johnsonville, because it gives so much insight into who they are as a coach and a leader. I always present this scenario: if we're going to give you an advance and we want you to write, the Steve Sorenson leadership book, and it can only have 5 chapters, what would those 5 chapters be? So that's always one of my favorite interview questions that we drive into. So I could share those 5 with you if you want.
Yes, please do.
So when I think about what would my chapters be, it's first of all, be clear with your members about what does great look like and how you're going to measure it. I'm a big believer that if people don't know what's expected and how great and what great looks like to you, there's no way they're ever going to achieve that. My second one is model the behavior you expect to see in others. It's easy for me to say, do this, do that. But if I'm not modeling that, they're going to watch my actions. They're not going to listen to my words. And number 3, get to know your members on a personal level, right? You're going to be working together. I can understand that there's things happening in your personal life that are going to impact it. So how can I understand more and be more empathetic if I don't know you? So I want to just get to know you on a personal level. Doesn't mean we're probably going to be best friends, but I just want to get to know about your family, what your likes are, what your interests are, those types of things. Number 4 is engage your members in the decisions that impact their lives to the best that you can. There are going to be things that I'm going to have to decide as a leader that I can't get your input on, but that should be in the very, very minority. There should be a lot of these things that, hey, there's a couple of ways that we could go after this. What do you guys think is maybe the most impactful? Because this is going to directly impact you and your families and how you do your work. So I'd like to get your input on how that works. And then we can take a little bit more collaborative approach, not necessarily a consensus, but at least I can ask for your opinion on how does that work. And then lastly, I read this in a book, Leaders Eat Last, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was, be the coach you wish you had. So I think about that as I look at my coaching style and my leadership style, I should be looking at that through the eyes of my members, because I find that your people only see and experience your behavior, and then they're going to decide if you're an effective leader or not. So I can think I'm the most effective leader, but if my members don't see it that way, then I'm not being the coach they wish they had, and I'm probably not as effective as I could be.
I'm going to take this and do it myself. So, Steve, I have personal values. It's something we believe in big time at Human Works 8 and we coach on. I love this extra step and this different way of thinking about things of writing your book chapters. What are your book chapters? So thank you for sharing that, because that's something that I personally, I'm going to do that step. I'm going to do what you just said and take that as something to do. I love it. That's absolutely brilliant. And so, Steve, now what we're going to do, we're going to move into our 3 parts of the mind segment. And so we are a new podcast. So just as a reminder to our listeners, the 3 parts of the mind segment is how we at HumanWorks 8 think about people. There are 3 parts to every person in their mind that makes them who they are: who we are cognitively, who we are affectively, and then who we are cognitively. And so, Steve, coming your way, I'm going to have a question in each of those areas, one cognitive, one affective, and one cognitive, to get to know you on a little bit better level. So let's start with the cognitive one first. This has to do with kind of like how you think. What's maybe a hidden talent or skill that has to do with Steve Sorenson? Maybe something that folks wouldn't guess.
This was one that just popped up the other day, and I don't know how it works, but if you've ever seen on whether it's TikTok or Instagram where a daughter and a father or a wife and a husband are doing this activity where they're down on their hands and knees, and then the wife or the woman will put their hands back behind their back, and they can balance, but the men just fall flat on their face. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but if you get down on your knees and then you put your elbows down, and women just have a different center of balance. For some reason, I can do that and I can balance. It was the weirdest thing. It came out because I had a coworker that showed me a video of her husband and daughter doing this, and he went down like a ton of bricks. And so I was like, oh, I should try that. And I don't know why that works, but for some reason I can do that challenge, and I don't know why.
Okay, well, you just gave me another homework item. I'm going to check that out. All right, now let's ask one that has more to do with feeling or personality on your side. What's a favorite of yours? Could be a book, could be a place, could be a hobby, an activity, a song. When I ask you for a favorite of yours, what's something that comes to mind?
One of my favorites is I've got this song that I've put it on my Pandora, and I'm old, so I have Pandora. So I have this song. Every time it comes on, it just makes me smile, and it makes me just stop what I'm doing, whether I'm down in the workshop or whether I'm in the backyard or wherever. And it's Van Morrison's Days Like These. And it's just such a powerful message that is by far my favorite song. I've actually created just an old radio station around songs that are just along that same vein of that song. And I'm a big fan of music because I was in radio broadcasting for many, many years. But the songs that I like are the ones where the message really means something. And to me, that was an amazing message in that song of Days Like These.
We are huge fans of music in our house as well, so this really resonates with me. For me, one of those artists that just puts me in a good mood every time is Pitbull. Pitbull just seems like he really is Mr. Worldwide. He is always on point, positive vibes, trying to get everybody in a good mood too. So that's one of my favorites is Pitbull too. So I love that you've got a music favorite there with Van Morrison, Days Like These. All right, now the third one, I'm going to explain this one a little bit because this is a third part of the mind we call cognitive that most folks aren't as familiar with. Cognitive has to do with your instincts, your natural ways of doing things. Just kind of what comes up as that natural instinct in terms of how you approach problem solving or approach things in life. And so a question I have for you, Steve, around that is, what's something that kind of gets you in the zone or maybe feeling like you're in flow when it comes to approaching different tasks or activities? Anything come to mind?
For me, the biggest thing is what gets me going is just interacting with a few key folks that I work with on a day-to-day basis, right? So whether it's my team or whether it's a couple of my customers or folks in the plant, of just brainstorming a couple things, just pinballing a couple of things to make sure we know what's the problem we're really trying to solve. I have found many times in my life that I start heading down a path and I'm making the wrong decisions or I'm trying to solve the wrong problem. So I like to really start out with what's the real problem we're trying to solve here, or what's the real point of what we're trying to accomplish here. And once I start to get that picture, then I can start to paint a really good roadmap in my head of, okay, so if that's what we're trying to go after, we need to first do A, B, C, D, and then we can just start trying some stuff, right? I'm a big fan of, let's start trying something. And if it doesn't work, we can always go back to what we were doing before. But let's first identify what's really the problem at hand that we're trying to solve here. And then let's just start trying some things, and let's experiment. And if it doesn't go right, then we'll just take it off and we'll go back and we'll do what we were doing before. So that's what kind of gets me in there, is when you can start exchanging ideas back and forth and get everybody aligned and on, oh yeah, that's really what we're trying to go after here.
Steve, I can't believe that we're up against time. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for joining us today. As we get ready to wrap up, what are some ways folks maybe can reach out, get in touch with you, learn more about what you're doing, and also learn more about Johnsonville?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's an easy way to get a hold of me. If you search up johnsonville.com, you'll find all about our organization. You had mentioned something earlier about, the story at the high school with the students sitting up front in front of the cars. As you guys listen to TV and radio and things like that, Johnsonville just launched a new ad campaign called Keep It Juicy. And that whole campaign is all about, let's not get angsty on the internet anymore. Let's not, it's all about disliking this or getting into people's face. And it's like, let's turn down the temp a little bit. Let's keep it juicy. The best way to cook our sausage is low and slow. So you turn down the heat a little bit, but it's about, let's get back to backyard barbecues. Let's get back to brunch. Let's get back to things that involve other folks. So as you think about the Keep It Juicy, it's all about a campaign of how do we just get to be more friendly in the world, and how do we just engage with others and let our uniqueness shine. But let's just get back together and have some fun and grill some sausage in the backyard or cook up some breakfast for a brunch.
Steve, you just had a pit bull moment for me. I'm ready. I'm ready to run through a brick wall and keep it juicy, and I think our listeners are too. So thank you for those departing words, Steve. Great wisdom there. And timely too that, we'll be launching this episode heading into Memorial Weekend. So just a reminder too for everybody, to go get those Johnsonville brats and everything and keep it juicy that weekend. Have some fun. Make sure you're connecting on authentic, real levels with folks, whether it be coworkers, friends, family. This is the time of year when everybody's spirit starts to pick up a little bit. Spring and summer are approaching. So keep it juicy. Steve, thanks so much for being with us. And if you're open to it, would love to have you on again in the future sometime.
Yeah, I'd love it, Jason. I had a great time today, and I really appreciate the conversation and wanting to know more about what we do at Johnsonville.
Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. Now it's up to you. See you next time.